A few weeks ago, I met with a group of young people the night before their confirmation. And I asked them, as I usually do, why it was they were going to do this strange thing the following day. What was it that made them think they wanted to stand up in front of their families and friends and commit themselves to a way of life that seems so completely out of fashion these days? Like me, none of them could talk about a dramatic moment of conversion. Mostly they talked about something in their heart or their gut, a hunch that this was a good and right thing to do, that this was something God was calling them to, even if they couldn't quite put words around it. When I pushed a little more, they could all talk about Jesus. They could all talk about his way of love and peace. They could talk about the hope and joy he brings, and they could all talk about the world they see each night on the news that seems to be running a little short on hope and joy and love and peace. And they could all talk about the church, which often doesn't do a great job of showing these things either. And yet all of the young people I was about to confirm had a sense that being a Christian would make a difference. That it was not just about saying the right things or believing the right things. It was about putting those things into action. A few weeks ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury reminded us that at the heart of what we do and believe as Christians is a revolution. It's not conventional. It's not just living life as it comes. It's a revolution in which Jesus Christ is not watching us from a distance, but is next to each one of us and says, "You are loved, you are called. Come and be with me and let us change the world. You are loved, you are called. Come and be with me." It's an invitation that speaks to the heart, an invitation that we can respond to only from the heart, from deep within. Otherwise, Christianity is something that just stays all in our head. Anne Lamott reminds us that the longest journey most Christians have to make is the 12 inches from our head to our heart. And in Jesus, we see most clearly what this might look like. From the Gospel reading set for this Sunday, as Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And the thing I find most fascinating about this is that the Greek word used for compassion has to do with the inward parts, especially the heart, the lungs, the liver and the kidneys. And so the idea of compassion in the Greek of the New Testament is that when you have compassion for someone, your insides get tight. You feel it here. Your stomach ties itself in knots. Your heart breaks. And we all know that feeling, that tightening when we watch the news or see family or friends going through struggles or pain. This is the compassion that Jesus felt for the people of his time. That tightening of the gut, that twisting, that breaking of the heart for a people in such need. And that same tightening can either paralyse us or it can be an invitation to reach out in faith and hope and love and begin to change the world. Just over 25 years ago, Urban Holmes, the English writer, suggested that our course as Christians leads to living in the world as God sees the world. He said we can debate the trivial points, but the vision is largely clear. To love God is to relieve the burden of all who suffer. The rest is a question of tactics. And living in the world as God sees the world means that our hearts will break, our guts will tighten, as we notice, as Jesus did, how much healing is needed. I recently read about some fascinating research from a researcher in the United States who wanted to know the answer to the question, if you decided that you were going to spend more time, say 2 hours a day, trying to be happier, would you actually become happier? And they did the research in 4 countries, in the United States, in Japan, in China and in Russia. And what they found seems at first to be a bit strange. In the United States, and it's probably true for Australia as well, if you try to make yourself happier deliberately, you don't become happier. But in the other countries they studied, if you try to make yourself happier, generally you do become happier. And what they found when they looked a bit more closely at the results was that in the United States, and probably here, When you try to make yourself happier, generally you do something for yourself. In the other cultures, when you try to make yourself happier, generally you do something for someone else. Which it seems to me confirms everything we read in the scriptures about what healing might look like. You see, when we read stories like the one from the Gospel for this week of Jesus healing people, it's tempting to see only that private moment, the encounter between two people that's quite separate from the rest of the world. But those meetings, while they are personal and often quite intimate, are ultimately about community. And the Gospels are quite clear that healing has to do with mending all of creation, and that curing the sick has primarily to do with restoring a person to his or her community. And so when Jesus brings healing, it's an invitation to full restoration. Those who are healed are no longer cut off from community, no longer forced to the margins. One writer says, healing from Jesus is an invitation into the kingdom of God, where the last shall be first, where the hungry are filled with good things, where enemies become friends, and where broken bodies become part of the one body. Healing in its fullness shows us something authentic about what it means to be human. It suggests that by being together, and only by being together, can we be truly happy. Healing is about others as much as ourselves. Healing in Christian terms involves a communion with God and a communion with people. The two are indivisible. And the healing that Jesus offers draws us in and then sends us out. It's profoundly communal. And it's something we're all called to be a part of. And of course, this calling is lived out in different ways for different people. And while probably we all know the feeling of our hearts breaking for the world, or our insides tightening when we watch loved ones suffer, we all respond in different ways. Because if vocation is about discovering who it is that God is calling me to be, then it's going to look different for all of us. In the Jewish tradition, there's a wonderful story about an old rabbi who was dying. And on his deathbed, Rabbi Joshua was asked what he thought life beyond the grave might be like. The old man thought for a long time, and then he replied, "I don't really know. But one thing I do know, when I get there, I'm not going to be asked, 'Why weren't you Moses?' or 'Why weren't you David?' I'm going to be asked, 'Why weren't you Joshua?'" During this month, we've been inviting people to think and pray about how they might be called to respond to God's invitation to be exactly the person you were created to be. And especially to ask the question, might I be called to ordained ministry within the church? It seems to me that the best way to discern these things is to listen to your heart. Where is the voice of compassion calling you? What might it look like for you to feed God's people, or to bring healing and hope to God's people? As the theologian John Cobb says, God is the one who calls us beyond all that we have become to what we might be. And I think the poet Dorothy Searle captures that call in her poem, Not Without You, quite well. She writes, "He needs you. That's all there is to it. Without you, he's left hanging, goes up in Dachau's smoke, is sugar and spice in the baker's hands, gets revalued in the next stock market crash. He's consumed and blown away and used up without you. Help him." That's what faith is. He can't bring it about, his kingdom. Couldn't then, couldn't later, can't now. Not at any rate without you. And that is his irresistible appeal.